Everybody, welcome to Business Insights. We're a panel of industry thought leaders from business advisory, tax, risk management, superannuation and investments, employment and HR, and property, give their insights into the current economic and financial landscape that impact small to medium businesses around Australia during this pandemic and beyond. My name's Lisa Garrido. I'll be your host this morning, introducing the panel of small business experts today. So I'd like to introduce first up, Adam Lyle from O'Brien Palmer.
Good afternoon, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Next, we have Ian McLaughlin from Imperium Accounting and Tax.
Thanks, Lisa. Welcome, panelists and guests.
And welcome back, Sam Qureshi from Moneyclip.
Thank you for having me on.
Bernard Tuimau from MGA Insurance.
Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, guys.
And Rob Skeen from Oasis Skeen.
Happy Monday, Lisa. Hi, viewers. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody. And I'm Lisa Garrido, and I represent Employment and HR from Enigma HR. So, Adam, I'd like to start with you, if that's all right. Any update from your end in terms of business advisory or insolvency?
Yeah, I'd like to just touch on a couple of things today, Lisa. First of all, the fiscal stimulus landscape, which I'm sure Ian will cover off a number of those elements later on, is being reviewed as we speak. It's been extended on JobKeeper. State governments are now looking at getting on the bandwagon with that as well. And without fiscal stimulus, the reality is that the depression that I've said for a few weeks now we will fall into will actually deepen. The reality, though, is that the economic cost to all of us in society as a result of that fiscal stimulus is going to be with us for quite some time. The argument is now that knowing that the fiscal stimulus package that the federal government has delivered is 9 times the amount of the fiscal stimulus that the Rudd government put in place when we hit the GFC. And remembering that the GFC, during that time, we actually didn't fall into recession thanks to the fiscal stimulus. The issue now is we are in a recession and we will arguably go into a depression. But without that fiscal stimulus, it will be considerably worse. Now, what does all this mean for small business and medium enterprises that are out there battling it day in, day out? Well, because of not only the fiscal stimulus, but also the other protection mechanisms that have been put in place, namely the commercial leases framework and the rental leases, and also the actions by the banks to refrain from any enforcement action against borrowers, those things have to come to an end at some point. At the moment, there's been no talk of an extension of the commercial lease framework, insofar as those commercial leases that were in place couldn't be enforced against up until at the end of September this year. And we haven't heard whether or not that's going to be extended. I'd like to think it would, but what happens if it doesn't? And that's the focus of my attention for the advice to the viewers today. So by now, you should have already had your COVID-safe recovery plan in place. If you haven't, it's not too late. You know, even reach out to Ian or and any of the other advisors that you've got in your corner and get a recovery plan in place today. Once you've got that in place, you'll know that you'll be prepared for any eventuality. And I wrote in a blog this morning that there is a potential that we're going to have a third wave in this country. Now, we've already been smashed with a second wave, and the Victorian economy, who provides normally the second largest economy to Australia, is going to take a long time to recover. But imagine just for a moment if we had a third wave. Could your business survive that? Could your business, in fact, survive the question being raised by your landlord, hey, I want my rent paid and I want the arrears paid as well? Then ask yourself the question, if your bank said to you, we've reviewed everything and we've looked at your request for an extension for a deferral of your loan until January or February or March next year, and we're not comfortable with that, so we're going to ask for that money to be repaid now. And if you can't do that, then we need you to offload it to another lender. The notion of even asking another lender to give you money to refinance because you've been asked by your existing financier to move is a very trying notion indeed. And most businesses wouldn't be in a great position to secure that alternative funding. So whilst we have this, for the want of a better term, lull in the situation with business while they're working out what potentially could happen, it is timely to look at all the alternatives and look at all the possible outcomes and get good advice about what to do when those things happen. If you don't, unfortunately, you could end up being one of those statistics that I spoke about last week, where you could end up being one of the 24,000 up to 36,000 businesses that could fall by the wayside in the coming year. I really hope that doesn't happen. That's one of the reasons why we love doing Business Insights, because the viewers that we speak to every week, and I think from memory now, if I can just have a moment of self-gratification for the six of us, I think we've got just over 1,500 viewers on average per week. That's 1,500 more businesses that aren't going to be succumb to the pandemic and the outcomes of it, hopefully. Hopefully they take everything that we say on board, but get some good advice and stay strong.
Thanks, Adam. Thank you for that. And speaking of good advice, particularly on the lending front, Sam, if I may, you're up next in terms of what are some of the challenges, particularly in reference to what Adam just spoke about with regards to lending.
Yeah. So firstly, from a lending perspective, the rates have been pretty steady. So that haven't really changed much over the last few weeks. Lenders are still lending, but definitely with the COVID-19 lens, very much harder from the perspective of wanting to make sure that you're not affected by the pandemic now. And also you need to attest that you're not likely to be affected by pandemic in the future, which is one of the big difficulties of dealing with banks when they ask you for that type of certainty. But ultimately, if you tick all the lending boxes, banks will have no problem lending, even for refinances, etc. Where the issues are coming in all around, where you have more than just the base income, for example, overtimes, commission, bonuses, casual income, contract income, all those things are being taken into account of exactly what Adam says. They're looking forward and saying, well, there'll be issues in the future, and those types of incomes are less likely to continue. And so they're discounting those, some by 20%, some by half in terms of what they will take as part of the lending. So whilst we have low interest rates, it still means that it's hard for some people to get a loan because of the type of income they have. And that's going to stay with us for some time, I would say. I don't see that changing in the short term, from that perspective. I have been also asked about some people to take money out of super and put that towards their home purchase. And the short answer to that is that is a big no-no. The bank doesn't take that into account. And the fact that you are taking money out of super as a deposit is an indication that your finances aren't right anyway. So if anything, it actually, you're shooting yourself in the foot by doing that. Because those payments showing your bank accounts, banks can see into your bank accounts now and all your transactions. So yeah, it won't work from that perspective. And lastly, and this is again goes to something that Adam also mentioned, the issues we have going forward. Many people have been on loan deferrals. There's still over $200 billion worth of loan deferrals in place right now. And you really need to plan for restarting making repayments at the very least on the interest component of those loans. But indeed, if you're in a need to continue with the extension of those, you really need to make sure that you're speaking with the bank as soon as you can. And so then, you're not leaving it to the last minute in order for them to review it, because going forward, it's going to be on a more of a case-by-case basis. So it doesn't mean that what you've had in the past is going to continue going forward. And of course, obviously, this is going to exacerbate some issues potentially in the property market down the track. I guess we'll wait and see what happens with that. And Rob can update us in due course.
Thanks, Sam. What about anything on investments? Anything you want while you're on?
Yeah. Look, there's actually a lot of stuff happening on the investment side. The actual markets itself, they've been reasonably flat. Last week, it was only up about 0.26%. We started today at 1% down, and we are in a reporting season. I'll talk about it in a second. We've also been doing a lot of reading about what's been going on and all the different measures and metrics that you can look at. One of those is a thing called Dumb Money, Smart Money Index, and this basically measures how the professional investors are buying or divesting money. And right now, the hot money of what they call the dumb money is actually making the markets go up. So it tells us that inexperienced investors are attracted to this rising market, and essentially they're chasing it upwards. So very dangerous, and these types of dislocation, it needs quite a bit of patience and caution applied to it. The other thing that I've seen of recent times is there's a lot of indexes rising. So, for example, here in ASX, 200, NASDAQ, Dow Jones in the US, and so on. And so in all these markets, the index is performing better than what they call the equal weighted equivalent, meaning that only a few stocks are carrying these markets forward, which gives that illusion of everything doing well. For example, in case of NASDAQ, a group of companies called Bank Plus, which is basically Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google, and a few other technology-based businesses. They're the ones who are really carrying the torch, as has the miners and a few stocks like Afterpay and so on, staple retailers who've made our markets go up in particular. So you really need to be mindful that, just because the market is going up, it doesn't mean that everything's going up. Right? That's really important to understand. And of course, banks remain under the water. In our market here, the banks account for a lot, and their dividends also being cut as well, which means that investors will experience less money in their hands to spend. We had the July unemployment figures, and that was about 7.5%, small uptick from a year ago, from a month ago, and that doesn't take into account people that were on JobKeeper and holding attachment for the time being. That's going to play out a bit more. In the previous catch-ups, I talked about the fact that might get up to about up to 10% before it goes back down. Of course, the big thing at the moment, everybody, is the reporting season. Is well and truly in full swing, and we've had some mixed bag of great surprises, and also some that have pretty bad trends. There's definitely two set of companies: those who benefited from working from home and those who have lost out from it. And you can really see that starting to go its way through. Tourism and gambling industry, for example, Qantas, Corporate Travel, Webjet, and the gambling companies are all going to report this week. So that's going to really tell us about how badly they're placed. Flight Centre recently reported a paper loss of $825 million, which is massive. About that. From my readings at the moment, it sounds like as if on average, companies will report about a 21% less profits this year, and it will take at least 2 years, if not more, for them to turn back into a positive territory again. So I guess in 2022, 23 is when we're going to see some better numbers affected. Now, you would have heard about all the vaccine noise coming out of Russia at the moment. Obviously, there's no doubt that if it works, Australian government is in the process of also signing some agreements with a German company. We're going to see some more optimism come from that, but this may not be long-lived because a lot of these vaccines, they're not properly tested for human usage, and so we don't know the side effect or the impact it could have on all these people who are going to have it. And if I took the big numbers, Earth population is about 7.8 billion people. If it ends up being even a 0.5% fatality, we're talking about something over 35 million people who are going to be affected from it. So we're definitely not out of the woods, even if you hear that there's vaccine. Because we don't know how good it's going to be, how effective it's going to be, and so on. And the very last thing I just wanted to mention to everybody is that if you are in a position where you're thinking of taking money out of your super due to COVID, and there's been $30 billion of that done so far, really consider that as your last option and don't make it your first. Look at other alternatives first before you mortgage your future for what's happening at the moment. Of course, if you need it, use it. If you don't need it, please leave your super where it is so you can still compound for you all the time. Back to you, Liz.
Thank you, Sammy G. Yes, I'd like to emphasize, please seek advice before you actually use your superannuation for any compensation or funding of anything you're doing. From my experience, we do get a lot of clients whose employees are inquiring about using their superannuation to fund non-essential items like shopping. Can you believe it? It is unheard of, but I have had inquiries on that. So please reach out to your advisors like Sammy G before you even embark on that concept. I urge all our viewers to listen on that. So with some good news, hopefully, Rob, do we have an uplift in the property market, or what's happening?
Oh, look, it's holding steady. The numbers from last Saturday, we had 523 homes going under the gavel, clearance rate of 66%. Total value of sales for 1 week was $229 million. So a lot of real estate transferred last week. And also from last week, Lisa, you said that you wanted to know some negotiating tips for real estate, and it might be good for some of our viewers. So I've got 5 tips today. The first one is my favorite, the number 1 rule, and that's always start with a low offer. And people always say to me, well, Rob, how do you know if it's a low offer? And, I don't really want to insult the owner. My question today, and I'm going to pick on someone today, Adam, you're staring at me. I want to pick you, Adam. Adam, how would you feel if you thought you placed a low offer in on a house, your first one, and the owner turned around and said, I'll take it?
I'd feel fantastic.
You'd feel fantastic, but you would probably also think, oh gosh, have I still offered too much, right? In your first one. So I guess ask yourself that question. And, if you're worried about insulting the agent, don't be. Agents are used to getting offers all the time. They understand it only might be the start of the negotiation and that there might be some further offers. And just some of the dialogue that you could perhaps use with the agent is, I've looked at the comparables in the area. And of course, we're looking at the comparables that are about 20% lower than the median price of that suburb. So use the comparables. You could also use the old, don't shoot the messenger. Mr. Agent, you're lucky that it's me putting in the offer. My wife wanted to offer something a lot less. And bear in mind that all the offers have to be put through to the vendor, no matter how low they are. So that's my first rule. My second one would be terms. Okay, so knowing the terms or placing in a favorable terms for the owner can help you save money. And that might be releasing the deposit to the owners to make a purchase on another property. It might be doing a shorter settlement or a longer settlement. And I'll give you an idea in regards to a longer settlement, how that might favour them. I had a client who was looking to buy a house in Bronte. There was another buyer that was interested in the home. Knowledge is power. I knew that the seller was running a little daycare, a family centre in the home. And the buyer that we were competing with offered $75,000 more, but they wanted to settle within the normal 6-week settlement. Now, me knowing that the owner hadn't found a place to relocate the children, we offered them $75K less, but with a 6-month settlement. Well, they took our offer because it gave her time to be able to move those kids. So terms is very important. Knowledge is power. Make sure your terms are favourable when presenting an offer to the owner. Here's one you don't hear one often about, which is called odd amounts. You notice that with a lot of sales, they always end in an even figure rather than an odd. So, 950, 960. Try offering your final offer with an odd amount. So, maybe a figure of $957,285. Now, what that shows, it's a bit of a laugh, isn't it? But what that shows is that, Mr. Agent, we have chucked every last dollar. That's everything we've got. It shows that you really, put in your best foot forward for your final offer on the property. My next tip, my 4th tip is concessions. Never give a concession without receiving one in return. Don't be a give-aller. Save something for Ron. So keep an ace up your sleeve to play later in the negotiation. And with a concession, never give one without getting one in return. What do I mean by that? If they're coming back at you saying, look, you'll need to pay another $5,000, you go back and say, yep, we'll pay the 5,000. However, can you throw in the pool table? Can you throw in the kids' cubby house? Right, get something in return. Now, the last tip today is ego. Never let the ego get in the way of buying your family's dream home. You might put in that low offer. The agent tells you to go get stuffed. Don't get upset about it, right? Keep professional. Don't lose sight that you're buying your family home. Remove that ego and keep going with it. Don't get upset about it. I have to do that a lot. I've got a little bit of an ego. Agents tell me to get nicked every week. I don't let that get in the way of pursuing the home for my clients. Anyway, that's my 5 tips for the week and my advice of the week. Thanks, guys. If you've got any questions, post them in the comments below.
Amazing. Thank you so much for putting work into that. I mean, I could not possibly look at a vendor straight in the eye and offer $911,000 and 5 cents.
Put it in writing. That's true.
I'd have to. That's why we need you. We need you, right? So speaking of taking that risk and putting the part, let's talk to Bernard Tuimau regarding insurance and risk. Bernie, over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for your time. I guess, during the pandemic, there was an expected upsurge in workers' compensation claims. Now, each industry sort of varied in types of claims that we sort of see. So if we look at the services industry, while in the initial stages, the lockdown kept us safe from social distancing and the actual exposure of COVID-19, the isolation, the job insecurity, and the financial concerns is something that contributed to mental health type claims. So the new remote working pattern in most of the service sectors is challenges that the challenges that we suffer at the moment is what actually constitute a mental health claim, and did that come from your working environment, or was this something separate to your workers' comp or workers' comp environment or your working environment? So what this point sort of talks about, Lisa, it talks about trying to identify whether or not workers' comp claim actually related to the actual working conditions or if this was something external. Now, it's quite difficult to prove, and these are some of the challenges that workers' compensation is suffering at the moment. What we're also sort of seeing in the workers' comp space, Lisa, is that the current economic environment is seeing fewer return to work. So what this talks about is, because of the COVID-19 and because of everyone working from home, some of the resources and some of the, I guess, things that support workers' compensation is quite difficult for people to access. So that's one thing that we also need to consider. I guess what we want to talk about today also, Lisa, is for employees, it's important for you to work with your employees to get back to work. You talk about it all the time, Lisa. You speak about the importance of working with your employees and working with the workers to come to a best plan for your employees to return to work. Always ensuring that you're working with your employees, coming to mutual agreements during these difficult times. One thing you also need to make sure is making sure that the wages and the wage declarations is being up to date, because during this difficult time, you want to make sure that is the case. For whatever case, if there is a claim, we want to make sure that the claim is lodged quickly during this time. We want to make sure that the claims are submitted to iCare and that you are working with iCare to try and get these claims resolved. And I guess do a back to work plan, working with your advisors to make sure that I guess your plans to return to work are implemented as quick as possible. So Lisa, that's all I wanted to talk about today.
Oh, thanks, Bernie. It is very challenging, even pre-COVID, with dealing with mental health claims because of the, in some element, intangibility of the proof of the mental health issue. And next week, I'll be talking about ways to support your teams in regard to the mental health well-being, and we'll refer to that. Thanks, Bernie. I do have a question for you regarding the claims, so we'll defer to that later if that's okay. Ian, over to you. Any updates on JobKeeper 2.0? I know that it is not legislated yet, but you've been giving quite a lot of input and awareness. It's this massive education campaign, obviously, for all businesses. Any changes, any updates from you?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I might just, I'm going to touch on JobKeeper and also the Super Amnesty again today, just to reiterate those facts. But one thing I just want to touch on that Sam brought up about the early release of Super is that the ATO, from their first data matching program, has found that over 2,000 people were ineligible for early release of super, and they have piloted an audit program, and they've resourced 130 staff specifically to look at this. And it's just really important that you don't withdraw this super unless you're 100% eligible, because the fines that they're talking about is $12,600 on top of the 10,000 or the 20,000 that you would have taken out of super, right? So it's just really important that you don't take that money out of super unless you are 100% convinced that you qualify, and make sure you get your advice from your accountant, from your financial planner. So let's now look at JobKeeper, right? So I want to try and simplify it because there is so much information out there, and I want to try and simplify it as much as possible. So remember, we've got JobKeeper 1.0, which is currently running until the 27th of September. Then we've got JobKeeper 2.0, which takes over from the 28th of September, runs all the way through to the 28th of March 2021. So what are the differences? Declining turnover test, they remain the same. So if the entity is turning over under $1 billion, then it's 30%. What are the turnover test periods? So for JobKeeper 2.0, you're comparing your September 2020 quarter figures with your September 2019 quarter figures, right? So let's forget about what we've heard previously about it being, originally it was the June quarter. And then for JobKeeper 2.0, the second part that starts in January and runs all the way to the end of March, the turnover test is the December quarter 2020 compared to the December 2019 quarter. So that's it in a nutshell. Now, what are the payments? So currently, JobKeeper 1.0, it's $1,500 gross a fortnight. JobKeeper 2.0, if the employees work more than 20 hours, it drops down from $1,500 to $1,200. Others, it goes to $750 a fortnight. That's for the first part of JobKeeper 2.0. Then on the second part, which starts in January and runs all the way to the end of March, it drops down again. So if the employees worked more than 20 hours, they drop down from $1,200 a fortnight to $1,000 a fortnight. And for the other employees that work less, they go from $750 a fortnight to $650 a fortnight. Now, an interesting fact about the employee eligibility is that previously it was only employees that had been there from the 1st of March. It is now employees that have been there from the 1st of July will qualify as well. Okay, so that's a really important piece there. But once again, and I'm going to be touching on this each week at Business Insights about any current changes in JobKeeper and what we need to do to qualify. And then I'm going to be running a separate webinar once JobKeeper 2.0 comes on board, okay? Because there's lots of intricacies there that we need to look at. The next thing that I wanted to touch on, just to reiterate, is the super amnesty, okay? So the government announced this back in March, and businesses have until the 7th of September 2020 to disclose to the ATO any unpaid superannuation in their company or trust, whatever it may be, all the way back from the 1st of July 1992 up until the 31st of March 2018. So if you apply for the amnesty, those amounts are then going to be deductible if they're paid before the 7th of September. And you aren't going to have to pay the $20 per employee administration charge that the ATO pays. So it's really worthwhile looking at seeing if there is any unpaid super. And it's a long period of time, all the way back to 1992, right up until the 31st of March 2018. But you think of the tax benefits that could be there, they're potentially huge out there for businesses. So look, they're the two major points for me. I am going to keep going on about them each week, just to reiterate the fact, because there is a lot of noise and a lot of confusing information out there. So hopefully I've made it as simple as possible for everyone. But yeah, I'll be touching on it again next week. So thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. Okay, so over to me today. I just want to give a brief on the changes in personal and carers leave. So on the last week, on the 13th of August, the High Court handed down a decision about the method of accruing and taking personal or carers leave under the NES, or National Employment Standards. The High Court has found that the entitlement to 10 days of personal and carers leave is calculated based on an employee's hours of work, not days. 10 days of personal leave can be calculated as 1/26 of an employee's ordinary hours of work in a year. Why is that an announcement? Because it actually overturns a decision made in August last year by the full federal court. So the details on that really is that the federal court's decision last year was that 10 days of personal leave entitles and all employees, regardless of the actual working hours, to 10 by 24-hour periods off work each year. This decision last week is a massive, I suppose, win for all employers, because what it is that their employees are entitled to 10 notional days of leave per year, and it's determined by identifying 1/10 of an employee's ordinary hours of work over a 2-week period. So I'll give you a quick example. So for a full-time employee working 38 hours a week, and of course 76 hours a fortnight, they would accrue leave on the basis of 7.6 hours as a notional day. Over the course of the year, therefore, the employee would have 76 hours of leave, or 10 by 10.6 hours notional days, as opposed to the decision by the full federal court last year. So the advantage is obviously for part-time employees working, say, 20 hours a week and 40 hours a fortnight. They would accrue on the basis of an entitlement to a 4-hour notional day as opposed to 7.6 hours. Basically, to simplify this, because it's fairly technical, all part-time employees will get a prorated leave based on the notional hours or ordinary hours of work they actually work. And the same will apply to shift workers. So why is this a relief for employers? It's because firstly, all payroll systems around Australia can actually accrue or prorata or deduct leave according to the new ruling. So it's not as if it's a massive change in the way that you would do payroll. The judgment also dispenses with the argument that part-time employees can access the same and sometimes even more hours of personal leave than full-time employees in some cases. So this is an amazing turnaround for all employers. There are more changes coming up with regards to submissions to the High Court and regarding employment relations and regarding terms in the Fair Work. So this is all now being reviewed due to the pandemic. And if there's any more updates on that, I will certainly talk about that. So what's the impact for employers? Now, just please talk to your payroll providers, whether they are your whether you've insourced them so they work with you in the business, or whether you've outsourced them. Make sure that you are accruing the leave now on the basis of the High Court's decision, not the full federal court's decision, which was made last year. So just do a review. You may have overpaid, or you may have actually undercalculated your accrual. So just do a quick revision and a quick audit of that. If you have any more advice and any more queries on that, please send us an email, and we can definitely divert the right resources to help you get your payroll right, particularly when it comes to personal leave. So that's it from me. So any questions from the panelists to any of us at this stage? Bernie, so my question to you, do you know, workers' compensation, well, the wage declarations is a deadline for that. When is that due for most businesses? Is that 2 months prior to or after the end of financial year, or what is the traditional deadline for the declaration of wages?
So the traditional deadline, Lisa, is post the actual estimate. So what generally happens is you will receive your renewal declaration asking you to complete your actual wage declaration, usually about 6 weeks prior to it renewing. So it's not based on the financial year wages, it's based on the policy period. So for example, if you've taken out a policy in January and I guess the time you factor in is the wages from January to December. So usually the renewal period, so for example, for 2020 to 2021, is generally based on an estimate unless you update that. So for example, if you declared $200,000 in wages, the workers' comp or iCare would basically renew it roughly about on $200,000. Then post that, they'll send you a wage declaration saying you need to complete this. This is due by such and such time. If there is an adjustment required, so if you estimated, 200,000, but your actual wages during that January to December period is actually 250,000, then you'll be asked to contribute that difference of in that case 50,000, and vice versa. If you've under declared, if your actual wages are less than your estimated wages, in return you'll get that adjustment back.
So do you think that there would be some reimbursements or refunds or rebates provided to employers based on a declaration they made for this year's wages because of the COVID period and the stand downs where employees have not been able to be paid, and we've used the JobKeeper stimulus to pay? I know you may not have the answer to this because obviously this is the first time this is happening.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to find out whether we can get some information on that, and maybe next week talk about that a little bit more.
I'll go into next week, and I think I've spoken about this on a few occasions, especially in the earlier discussions, is that now more than ever, it's important for you to sit down with your insurance broker. Your accountant or sometimes your bookkeeper completes these actual wages declarations quite often. So you'd like to think that the information that's provided by your accountant or your bookkeeper is quite accurate. But it is quite important that, you as an employer sit down with your insurance broker and your accountant, have a phone conversation about what the actual wages are, because, for example, a lot of businesses, mine for example, policies due in September. And had I sat down in September and sort of when I sat down in September and estimated my wages, I wasn't expecting this sort of stuff to happen with COVID-19. So I estimated quite a high wage bill. Obviously, circumstances changes. A lot of employers may have laid off staff. That's actually going to have an impact on your actual wages in comparison to your estimated wages. So look, every dollar counts, and that's why it's important for you to sit down with your bookkeeper and your insurance broker or your accountant to make sure that those wage declaration actually reflects your current situation.
Absolutely, and that goes the same for the way that businesses do their accruals when it comes to leave entitlements, because there again has been a case just recently, and it's been, I may as well say that now, the Uniting Aged Care Homes has entered into an enforceable undertaking with the Fair Work Ombudsman and is back paying employees more than $3.3 million. So this is all now coming out of the woodwork because most large companies and corporates are doing audits on whether they have actually paid the right entitlements to all their employees. Any other questions, guys? No? Okay, well, thank you so much for our viewers and our listeners. Thank you, panelists. Today, I will have a quote for the day, and I'd like to end with, you've got to get up every morning with determination if you're going to bed with satisfaction. That's it from Business Insights. Have a good week to all our viewers, and thank you, panelists, and we shall see you again next week.
See you later.
Please, Anne. Thank you, everybody.